The overarching theme for today's discussion is the surge in online brand impersonations of credit unions in 2024. And that's as reported in Allure Security's recently published SPOOF 25 Credit Unions Threat Report. That report is the only one of its kind that we're aware of. And this is actually the third annual edition of that report. So it collects and analyzes all of our online brand impersonation detection data, and it's focused solely on credit unions. If you haven't already, I strongly recommend that you visit our website at alluresecurity.com to take a look at that report. And so with that said, we've got a full docket of discussion questions. So I really want to get going. So to start, I'm going to introduce you to today's panel. So first, we have with us Brian Hinze. Brian is president and CEO of the National Credit Union Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. That's NCU-ISAO. Brian is responsible for overseeing the organizational operations and executing the strategic mission and vision of NCU-ISAO, and he is committed to the success of the organization's members and their journey to cyber resilience. Brian joined the organization shortly after its inception in 2016 and brings over 20 years of experience participating in and leading member associations. Brian has also worked in for-profit industry for international companies while also leading small business focused teams. So Brian has received multiple individual industry awards in his career while completing several respected technical sales and leadership training programs across multiple industries. I've known Brian for a while now. I got to go to the CU Intersect event this year, and Brian is just a super intelligent and just really works to share information amongst this community. So it's really exciting to have him on this webinar with us. So thanks, Brian. Next, we have Mark Frieden. Mark started his career in the credit union industry in 2010 when he joined Hughes Federal Credit Union as an IT manager for the Information Security and Technology Department. In 2021, Mark was promoted to VP of Cybersecurity when cybersecurity was split off from IT. Prior to this, Mark worked for a startup fiber optic sensing company as the IT manager and network administrator and held this position for 10 years. Mark also spent nearly 3 years as the IT manager principal at the University of Arizona College of Optics. And Mark has also, interestingly, he's also worked as a 911 operator and law enforcement radio dispatcher. So very cool. I met Mark at that same event I was talking about, so I'm very excited to have him on the panel. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for being here. And then last, of course not least, we have Gilbert Young. Gilbert has over 30 years in information security and fraud, with 20 years in the Department of Defense contracting world and 10 years in the financial industry. He has held many positions in both industries, the latest being VP of Information Security at ORNL, Federal Credit Union, dealing with information security and fraud. He says that when he is not beating down threat actors, he enjoys metal detecting, travel, and hiking. So thanks, Gil. We've had a number of conversations over the phone. Very excited you could be a part of this with us as well. So, gentlemen, with that said, we are going to jump right in here. Main theme here is our SPOOF 25 report, the surge in credit union impersonations. The report highlights a 285% increase in brand impersonation attacks targeting credit unions. We also saw a notable surge for institutions with 200 million to 5 billion in assets, just kind of showing us that you're never too small or big to be a target of these impersonations. So the first question, and we're starting with Brian here, is how does that surge compare with what you've been seeing in your experience? And how should credit unions interpret and take action on those numbers?
Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you. So a little bit of background on the ISAO, just for context in my comments, is not only do we work to foster information sharing and collaboration amongst the credit union community, so that's the sharing of sightings of cyber threats and enriching that intelligence, but we also want to keep tabs on the trends, the emerging threats in the space that are discussed in illicit communities, the dark web. We have multiple partners that help us gather insights into what's kind of happening beforehand and after the fact. So that's sort of the preface to what I'm about to say. NCU-ISAO has been an organization for about 8 years, and while we've really grown over the last couple of years, especially, the information sharing has always been really awesome. And I will say that if I go back a couple of years in my mind, I would say that this started hitting things hot and heavy, probably not too far from when Allure kind of came to market, frankly, but this really started hitting a lot of credit unions, especially the larger ones at the time, hot and heavy. There was a ton of information sharing going on, and frankly, it's been exhausting for some of them. Some of these folks that were targeted a couple years ago are still targeted to this day, persistent and ongoing, to the point where it's been fatiguing from an information sharing site, plus, or from an information sharing standpoint. Add to that the range of sources that you're really kind of required to keep up with in order to take action on these. You've got new domain registrations. You've got hacked websites where, billions of those that are out there on the open web. Then you've got dynamic DNS infrastructure. If you're unfamiliar with that, that's hosting websites on services like DuckDNS, Azure, websites.net. Cloudflare's got a service, I believe, as well. And all of this makes it really, really a heavy lift, and it has increased quite significantly, to be honest. We also can corroborate the reality of the success of these campaigns, not just through the volume, right? If they're unsuccessful, then the volume of it really doesn't matter, other than it being a headache. And when we corroborate this with dark web information, which is both the solicitations for what the bad guys like to call scam pages, that's sort of their slang. So we say, hey, I have scam pages for all these banks and credit unions, let's say, and you can buy them from me, and then you go set it up. It's already been set up to look just like their online banking. It collects all this information. But then after the fact, with taken over accounts being sold in these illicit marketplaces, they'll take screenshots substantiating the successful access of a member account. It'll show the balances. They'll apply a price. We see this all the time, and honestly, it's definitely on an uptick right now. A side note that we're watching, we're looking to further verify is, while historically larger credit unions, because of the volume of members that they might have in the market, tend to be targeted a little bit more, at least more frequently. We're also seeing, with ongoing ransomware attacks targeting the credit union industry, that maybe these fraudsters are being opportunistic, and regardless of your asset size, how many your members have, if you're claimed by a ransomware gang or you just have data stolen, it might be a great opportunity for those fraudsters to then send fake text messages to your members, send them to brand impersonation sites, try to take advantage of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And while we've got a little more research to do to really say this is happening, it does seem to be a potential pattern. So at the end of the day, yeah, it's a big deal, and it's going to be something that's very difficult to do without help.
Thanks so much for that kind of overview there, Brian. So Mark, over to you. Anything to kind of add to what Brian shared, and then also, if you're seeing that surge as well?
We saw the surge initially way back when, and we started information sharing. Joining NCU-ISAO was a huge help to us. And then taking on the different threat actors and trying to find out how they're getting our information, what they're doing, where they're lying, where are they copying our logo? Can we take a look and see if we can find our logo, or a Facebook page or something that has our information on it? Check with our marketing team, take it down. Trying to do some of this ourselves. Worked out all right, but after we started taking on some vendors that would help us with this, like Allure for one, we started seeing things start to back off. And we know now that all the work we've been doing is starting to pay off. We are seeing flurries here and there, but we're pretty clear sailing right now. And it's to the point where when something does pop up, it really gets everyone's attention, because we're not used to it as much anymore. I say that, I should knock on wood, but hard work does pay off in this. Ignoring it is what's going to cause more issues.
Very good, Mark. It's interesting. It was a huge issue. You solved some of it, and then so now when it happens, it's almost even more noticeable, et cetera. Thank you for that insight. That's interesting to me. Over to you, Gil. Anything to add here with your experience at ORNL and just in general?
Yeah, certainly. So for ORNL Federal Credit Union, we did see a creep in intensity and scale once we started to approach 3 billion in size or so, asset size. Well, I have not seen an increase in 2024. I did experience it in 2023. We beat back well north of the 120, probably closer to 150 sites that popped up that year, and we did it all by hand, which was very tedious. We sort of noticed once we started to explore why this was happening and how, that the size of the asset size didn't matter really. It's more of a matter if you were, paying attention to it, keeping that porch light on, fixing the window when someone throws that stone through it, and getting rid of it as quick as possible. That seemed to deter them more than anything else. So what we did was we would basically set alarms at points of the day when we knew that the sites were coming up, and then we'd use these tools, and there was at least half a dozen tools that we would go through, swivel chair between them, trying to take this down, trying to send notice to the web hosting provider, send notice to the DNS provider, etc. That took a lot of time, a lot of effort to do. And during that year, we discovered brand protection. We engaged Allure, we got under contract, and then soon after that, there was still a peak, but it died down. Since then, for example, last year in 2024, we saw maybe 1 to 2 dozen at most attempts against us versus the 150 or so that we saw the year before. So it just goes to show that the more you pay attention to it, like Mark was saying, the better off you are. And now it's to a point where on Friday, if someone drops a site, and it just happened a couple of weekends ago, someone dropped a site, fraud site out, Allure picked up on it, had it taken down by Saturday morning, and I barely knew about it, type of thing. Monday morning I roll in and it's all taken care of. So it's quite a different story now.
Thanks everybody for your insight on that question. Moving on here. Now I want to talk a little bit about sort of responsibility in the ecosystem for these scams. Mark, we're going to start with you. But here is the question. So scammers exploit a broad ecosystem, right? Gil, you were talking a little bit about this. But from domain registrars and hosting services to social media platforms and mobile app marketplaces. So the question is, where does responsibility lie in addressing these threats? And kind of how can credit unions strike a balance between pushing for accountability with some of these players in the ecosystem, but then also strengthening their defenses? Mark, why don't you start us out?
Yeah, we all want everyone to be good network citizens, but that's not always the case, either through the fact that they're overwhelmed, they don't have enough support. It could be that they really don't care. I mean, there's a lot of issues, a lot of different issues out there that can come up with this, but ultimately it's your brand. You want to protect it. So it is your responsibility to track it and make sure that things are being taken down. I hear from other vice presidents here. I hear from other employees when things come up, and they want it done. They want it fixed and taken care of. We don't want our members being scammed.
Thank you for that, Mark. I like how you said it's your brand, and what I like to say a lot is like nobody cares about your brand as much as you do, no matter how much you would want them to. So that really rings true for me. Gil, over to you. Any additional color based on this everybody's playing a part in this ecosystem. Everybody has kind of a role to play here, but where does that responsibility lie? And how do you balance that? What do you think, Gil?
So I agree with Mark. It ultimately lies with us, with the brand. But to be honest, I think some of the providers are not forced to care enough. I read of one registrar recently that would resell domains that were taken down within a month or so of the takedown, which basically means that the fraud kit that was set up to use that domain name would probably still be sitting there. All the fraudster would do is wait a little while, wait for the domain to come back for sale, buy it, and then relaunch their fraud campaign. A lot of SMS campaigns we've seen use virtual providers. Some that I email so much, I've got a few direct emails that go straight to their higher level tier of fraud fighters. And you can't really blame them because they're in the business to sell those domains. They're in the business to sell the SMS service. But I do feel like sometimes there is some responsibility that should be put on them. They're attentive, but their main focus is not fighting fraud. It's sort of an afterthought for them. And just to be honest, I think there should be a little bit more legislative or regulatory pressures that need to be brought to bear on them, just to help us out, throw us a bone.
Great input there, Gil. I know that our managed defense takedown team has run into similar situations where we contact the registrar about a domain, and then I can't remember what the terminology is, but there's sort of a discontinue versus a suspension. And if they do one, it's just like, okay, yeah, we took that content down, but then the domain is right back for sale. And the same scammer can buy that back. And it doesn't seem to be vetting. I don't think that's true of all registrars or anything, but there are some where that happens.
If you can't tell the difference between the registrar and a threat actor, there's a problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it goes to the point of Allure constantly monitoring all the domains that you ever have an issue with. As soon as that domain pops up again, Allure can take care of it.
Yeah, there's that sustained kind of disruption where, like you said, continuing to monitor so that we can take anything right back down if it happens to resurface. Brian, over to you. Do you have some thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, quickly. I mean, I think it's been, pretty well said by both Gil and Mark there. But, obviously there's some geographical related structural considerations in the whole infrastructure system. There's geographical disruptions to just the takedowns based on time of day, even though you would hope those wouldn't exist. You've got inherent flaws in the system. I know that we're focused on online brand impersonation, but if we look at like call center spoofing, right, while initiatives in the legislative side or pushed by the legislative side like Stir Shaken are meant to help inhibit call center spoofing, the system itself has some flaws that make it pretty easy for bad guys to perpetuate. So going back to the, your brand will never be as important to anyone else as yourself, and no one really knows your brand like you do. I definitely think that at the end of the day, the best benefits are going to be taking ownership of that and doing what you can about it. Services, third-party takedown services, monitoring services like what Allure offers, certainly do that as a focus when, I know that as soon as we're done here today, not just myself, but Mark and Gil are going to move on to probably totally unrelated tasks, right? And so, having that full-time kind of expertise narrowed down with the relationships required to get this kind of thing accomplished. And if there's resistance, let's say structurally from overseas issues, there might be another thoughtful mitigation that can kind of protect the risk a little bit in the interim.
Thanks for that, Brian. And I feel like I should clarify something really quick. Nobody cares as much about your brand as you do, except for Allure Security. I want to get that in there really quick. Okay, so now we're going to move on. This is a topic that we have all been talking about for more than a year at this point, but AI and its impact on phishing and fraud. So, I'm sort of stating the obvious here, but I do have to kind of get us set up here to launch into the discussion. Generative AI, it's made phishing scams, more convincing, even enabling deep fakes. It makes it faster than ever to create these scams and that sort of thing. So we're starting with you, Gil. And the question is, how do you think AI will tip the scales in favor of scammers? How can advancements in AI-powered defenses keep up? And how should credit unions sort of prioritize investment in addressing AI-fueled threats and defenses versus maybe other cybersecurity needs? Over to you, Gil.
Certainly. So oddly enough, my CEO, we were recently at an all-hands meeting, and that was the one thing that she mentioned would keep her up at night was fraud and also the threat of AI. But fraudsters have proven to be organized. They have built up robotic processes to basically take the information that they gather and commit fraud with it. They apply the information, apply it into a tactic, and they launch their campaign against us. So far as we know at the credit union here, ORNL Federal Credit Union, we've only had artificial voices deployed against our call center. But my bigger fear, and this is my mind going off into dark places, is when the fraudsters reach a sophistication level where they combine the raw data that they harvest or purchase off the dark web, and they start to do things like, for example, call the member to get a voice sample so they can create an artificial voice there. Or even if they actually are able to take over the computer, some of the fraud detections is biometric, like keystroke and stuff. They could get a keystroke pattern or a biometric pattern from the member off of that computer, put that into the bundle that they sell on the dark web, and then use LLMs, AI large language LLMs, call our call center or interface with other banking channels like audio banking and such with all that information, either to get more information out or to commit actual fraud with it. And it's something that if I can think of it, other people can. It's all possible today. Something we also do look for is companies that do make investments back with respect to that type of threat. So that's our experience.
Dark places is right, Gil. Thanks for that. Now over to Brian. What do you got for us in terms of this AI?
Yeah, especially when it comes to the creative social engineering aspect to leverage AI and get voice samples. That has also been a fear that I share with Gil. It's not uncommon during brand impersonation attacks, fake online banking, that you need to socially engineer in a callback, let's say, the 6-digit one-time passcode, right? And even if the member is savvy to catch that and not necessarily fall for it, keeping someone on the phone for 30 seconds just to get enough of a voice sample. I can demonstrate in a talk I give on deepfakes is enough to create a very good replica of one's voice. So deploying technologies with advanced, biometric voice verification in your call center, I think is something certainly to look out for. And, when we talk about artificial intelligence driven scams in general, I like to joke that it's not like, they come with a stamp on them saying, this phishing email or this phishing text lovingly created with artificial intelligence. No, the assumption is that it's going to be more effective if the fraudsters are, let's say, non-native English speakers, that the likelihood of some of those things you've trained the general public on your members for years to look for inconsistencies, spelling errors, things like that, those won't necessarily be present anymore. So I think, to scale, it should just be assumed that not only will they be, bigger, badder, faster, and more effective at their attacks, that's what's driving AI. So, being prepared on the defensive side. While they didn't get specific too, I did want to share, if you're wanting a little bit of data on return on investment for artificial intelligence-driven technologies, there's an annual report by IBM called the Cost of a Data Breach Report. And from what I've seen, looking and tracking the data in that report, this is the first year that I have seen that artificial intelligence defensive technologies has been categorized as a cost reducing factor. And besides employee education, second only to that was artificial intelligence. So they didn't dig deep into each technology and the nature of it. But at the end of the day, they were showing a quantifiable return on that investment as it pertains to, if you had a breach, would artificial intelligence help you? So I think that's something, as you're watching for emerging tech things that can solve real world problems, especially around fraud, cyber threats, to be looking at.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Brian. So we're going to move to Mark, and then I just want to let you all know we're going to rewind a little bit because we did get a question from the audience, but we'll do that after Mark, you've had a second to weigh in here on the artificial intelligence aspect.
Yeah, much like Gil, I've had conversations with our CEO and about AI, and one of his standards now that we need to follow is that he wants us to find out from all of our vendors how they're using AI and if it can help us in any way. And it may not necessarily be for cybersecurity, but that was one of them. We're asking our vendors, do you use AI? How do you use it? And most of them do. The other part of it is we're hardening everything. If we phish ourselves and do a phishing campaign to see how well our employees do, there's no such thing as that's not fair. We've had employees say that's not fair. Well, with AI, it's anything can happen. It's all open. So we're just, everything's getting hardened, making sure we now have a instead of having a password, an employee verbal password that we used to change monthly, now it changes daily. We're everything we can do to try to thwart this and not have to, we don't want to succumb to this. We're asking, for example, we had one vendor that was talking about authenticating members by their voice through our contact center. Well, what about AI? Well, we know about that, and we are successful in detecting it. Okay, I don't know if I believe that, but that's kinds of questions we're asking.
Very good. Yeah, that my voice is my password. I shouldn't even say that out loud because someone might record that from this webinar, right, and use it against me. So really quick, want to go back to this ecosystem one. I think that this is really going to depend on the case, but this is probably either something that Mark and Gil have dealt with directly, or Brian, I'm sure you've talked about this before, but it looks like somebody that submitted a question, they're having a little bit of back and forth with their kind of core banking provider that does their website, and they're kind of talking back and forth about whose responsibility it is to get a fake website taken down that is using that branding from that online banking service. I just wonder if you all have any tips in terms of this, working on this problem with your kind of online banking provider. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
For us, we wouldn't bring the online banking provider in at all. The site is just a scrape, and we have different methods. We'll talk to Allure. We have other vendors. We also look at we have something called beaconing, so we can see that page come up. We have, vendors are looking for our logo. But yeah, we never would involve the online banking provider. That's really not something they're responsible for.
Gil or Brian, anything to add to that?
The only thing I might add is there may be a shared responsibility if it pertains to like a fake app in an app store type of a thing, where they may be able to help out, in getting that taken down, because it's also their code being affected if someone's made a copy of it and placed it somewhere it shouldn't be.
Very good. I hope that helped for that question. And we're going to keep moving on unless, Brian, you had anything you wanted to add there.
No, I mean, it's kind of a question going back to where you perceive the priority versus the responsibility. And it's not always easy to address a lot of things with various vendors. And then, the bigger they are, the more difficult it might be. While we know that from a market share standpoint, there's some pretty significant vendors out there that are providing online banking hosting. I can tell you that when we polled just within our NCU-ISAO membership, so a much smaller sample size, when we polled organizations by asset size and provider to see if there are any trends that one is targeted more than the other, and I hope this kind of makes sense as I'm saying it, what we found was it wasn't just one or two online banking providers that were targeted because they have a stylized template, you swap out some logos or something like that. It was like over a dozen just in our small sample size in a quick poll. It wasn't even a formal survey. It was a quick poll we did in our Slack channel. So, this could really, regardless of who you use, come up. And so while you may want to address some shared responsibility where you see it at the contract stage, at the end of the day, it's going to kind of come back to, it's your brand, and the efforts you take to protect it proactively are going to pay off.
Great. Thanks for that information, all of you. Now, back to kind of our set of questions here. So now we want to talk about kind of education versus technology. So impersonation scams erode member trust, but member education can fall short, whether that's due to a lack of engagement or lack of retention. But here's the question. Should credit unions double down on educating members, or is it more effective to focus on technological safeguards that protect them behind the scenes? What are kind of the pros and cons of either approach? We're going to start with you, Brian.
Yeah, so I can, you'll have your own perception of this, whether you're Mark or Gil about to answer or someone in the audience. What I can tell you that always stands out is that a balanced approach is really kind of the only solution, because on one hand, the members are the ones who are being targeted with a scam. And if they fall for the scam, then their information gets compromised. So member education is really, really critical. However, I recall a couple of years back, maybe it's been a few years now, when we saw a huge spike in this. And one credit union in particular was really working very diligently to keep their members informed about the ongoing risk. And when a new tactic would emerge, ultimately still leading to online brand impersonation, but when a new lure or tactic would emerge, they would further educate that. And at some point, they started realizing, hey, we're working really hard to educate them. Are we over-informing them? Are we creating a perception that somehow their money's unsafe at our financial institution? While it's a valiant and noble and important effort, the other organization down the street isn't telling me about all of this all the time. So what's wrong with your bank? What's wrong with your credit union? What's wrong with my money at your financial institution? So that is potentially a real challenge. So I think the balanced approach is really important to make sure that you're working hard to get the sites taken down, but also educate your members, and maybe instead recognize that different people consume information in different ways, and trying to have a multimedia type approach, from email to, maybe static web page with education, maybe a social media post or a short video, something like that, and doing a more layered approach through different channels there than just constantly bombarding the members with, hey, look out, look out, look out.
Gil, what do you say here? Education versus technology, pros and cons, that sort of thing.
I agree with Brian. There does need to be a balanced approach to it. But I do think, educating the member and keeping that education frosty and relevant is important. I sort of view our members sort of as a partner in fighting against the fraudsters. They can alert us to it. They can also, if we train them, they know what to do when they see it. So we have both internal and external processes out there. The external process is member facing. where if they do get fraud, we have a member education page. They can go to it, they can look and see what to do. And on there are instructions on how to inform us about the fraud so that we can deal with it or put a takedown if need be in. And there's also instructions internally if a member contacts us, the staff knows what to ask for so that they can get that information routed properly, get it taken care of. The fear I have in all this is sometimes the fraud doesn't involve a technical aspect, and that's where there's the only defense you have is education. So that's where I think it's important to let the member know, for example, like if they get a call and they say, hey, it's ORNL fraud department, I need this info. It's important to tell the member, we'll never ask for XYZ, and list all the things we'll never ask for, so that they can recognize that it's a suspicious call. And there's always the option to just hang up, call us directly, and you'll definitely get our call center. But the only thing I have to add to that is to encourage you, if you don't have a security education page out there already, go ahead and get one built so that you can direct your members to it in case they do fall afoul of the fraudsters.
Great stuff there, Gil. Get those security awareness pages up. Mark, what's going on over at Hughes in this realm, and kind of challenges, pros and cons of education versus technological safeguards in these scams?
I think we're very similar to Gil's shop. We have a page, marketing handles that, and they pass everything by us in cybersecurity, make sure that everything's up to date, looks correct. And again, we don't want to like what Brian was saying, we don't want to over notify and make it look like there's what's up over here. The other thing is to see how many people are really being affected. If 3 people say this happened to them, that's not an epidemic. We're not going to, that doesn't prompt a mass member alert. If the numbers are higher, we talk to marketing, try to figure it out. We also, another thing to do is keep the channels open, like Gil was saying. Your members can also be your staff. Your staff are members of the credit union and their loved ones. Do they get any alerts or anything? Did anything come up on their phone that looked like a scam? Did they get a phish or a vish, as they call it, and take action on that? Leverage your internal and your members for almost like crowdsourcing. Don't forget that path of information.
Great stuff. Love that, crowdsourcing some of that. Moving on, so in the Allure Security Spoof 25 Credit Unions Threat Report, we cite a number of studies that show financial account takeover fraud as a result of online brand impersonation can cost credit unions upwards of 11% of their annual income. That includes direct losses. There's also member churn risk and more. But the question is, how can credit unions use this data to build a strong case for proactive investments in brand protection? And kind of what strategies have worked for you in gaining buy-in from stakeholders for a more modern approach to online brand protection? We're starting with you, Gil.
Yep, certainly. So where I'd start there is just to cite the Electronic Funds Transfer Act. That's an act that limits the damage to the member depending upon how fast they report the fact that they have been defrauded. So that's definite money loss to the credit union in those circumstances. But also, like you were mentioning, beyond the monetary damages, there's reputational damage, and that can be costly as well. If you ever are unfortunately under a fraud campaign that's against your credit union, just watch the comments made about your corporation on Facebook. A lot of them that we've seen is, has my financial institution been hacked? Why isn't my financial institution doing anything about this? Those type of comments can also be damaging. And just looking back on us, we were spending a lot on losses, on working the fraud cases. Takedown efforts were taking a huge percentage of hours a week in labor to get them done. So all of that, just to sum it up, it wasn't good. And just for our experience, it didn't go away until we got the brand protection. Once we got that brand protection in place, things really started to stabilize. And I think, to be honest, the fraudsters realized that, okay, now we're really paying attention to this issue. And we have a professional organization that's watching for our back, and it's not worth it, and they just move on.
Great stuff there. Thanks for bringing up the Electronic Funds Transfer Act. Very good information for people to be thinking about if they don't already. So over to you, Mark. Building business cases, return on investment on online brand protection, that sort of thing. How did you kind of work to get buy-in and or how just advice for people on the line that are looking into doing that?
I think it starts with having a good relationship with your board and your CEO. They trust me. We go over these things. We have the board reports. We show what's going on. They ask any questions they ask, we answer. Some of these protections that we have are really not that expensive. They're not going to cause a huge, question mark on the budget. So it's not been too much of an issue. I haven't really had to make a case and try to compare losses versus the cost of the protection. Maybe in the future that might come up, but it's just pretty smooth sailing over here.
Great stuff. So Brian, I want to hear what you have to say about this, but I just really quick want to say, we've done a really good job managing our time here. So there will probably be additional time. If anybody on the line wants to submit more questions, this is a really great panel to get some perspective from. So I really encourage you to use that Q&A widget so that we can ask Brian, Gil, and Mark what advice they might have for you on your particular issue. With that said, Brian, building the business case, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I pick up on both what Mark and Gil have said a little bit. And, one of the things with fraud losses, to kind of preface that with the old adage, like, how do you quantify a return on cybersecurity investment? Hopefully none of you have experienced a data breach and seen what that expense looks like to the business. And I hope none of you will. But, kind of save that loan scenario. It is hard to justify sometimes, like, why do we need this protection? What is this going to do for us? Well, for fraud, you can just kind of look back at the P&L. I imagine by now most of you know what 2024 looked like for you. You're carrying into 2025 a fraud loss budget, and while that may be segmented a little bit between plastic card fraud, other types of fraud, at the end of the day, you're assuming some losses there. So, if you can kind of narrow it down into what this problem has cost you through account takeover, well, you've got a very tangible business case right now that's quantifiable. Easy for me to say, we're a smaller organization, so while we absolutely have a governing board of directors and not going upstream through layers to the board to make that business investment case, but I do think you have numbers to work with for sure, and something that you can really kind of compare and make a solid business case. And then you get into the things like Gil said too, on top of Electronic Funds Transfer Act. You've got your reputational risk loss. Look at social media, look at what people say, the assumptions they make. Everyone kind of jumps down the path of, it must be a data breach now, something bad happens. And sadly, that can sometimes be true, but certainly not all the time. There's still legitimate IT outages and, organizations being targeted with fraud, and do our best to inhibit it. But yeah, the advantage is it's quantifiable.
Great stuff. Great tips for quantifying some of this and getting that business case together to really modernize your approach to this problem. So thank you, gentlemen. This is actually our last question. It's a juicy one. I'm pretty excited. What we want to do is we want to kind of leave the audience with a real good sort of immediate term actionable tip on this. So we've talked at length about this growing, evolving problem. What is one actionable tip you would share with the others on this call that they can kind of take back to better protect their brand online immediately? Mark, we're going to start with you.
I'm limited to just one?
Absolutely not. As many as you like.
Okay. I think you need to get your foundation in order first. Work with your marketing department. Make sure your credit union's name, logos are trademarked. Check the USPTO site. Do a search of your credit union, see what's out there. Make sure your trademarks are active and not dead. I found a credit union with dead trademarks. Let them know about it, so they went back in and fixed all that. The trademark also needs to be broken apart. You need to trademark the entire logo, but also the stylized abbreviated logo that's in the corner. The reason you want to do that is things like BIMI, which is brand indicators for message identification, and caller ID branding are going to use just that little piece of your logo. That using your entire logo with your name in it won't work because it's too big. It's not going to be visible in email messages. It's not going to be visible on your phone. Then the final tip I have is purchase similar domains for defensive and brand protection purposes. I don't know if anyone's aware of it out there. Hopefully they are, that .credit union and .coop are out there for purchase. If a threat actor owned them, I mean, that wouldn't be good. It'd be your credit union's name with .credit union on the end. You're going to get a lot of your members falling for that. Buy that before they do. Also, if there's any derogatory top-level domains out there, buy those too, so someone doesn't bring up something really negative about your credit union, just to protect your brand, to protect your reputation more than anything else. Let's see, if your domain is already taken, let's say you want one and it's a .com, you're a .org, and it's already gone, put it under a lot of monitoring. Use Allure, use whatever you can to monitor that domain to make sure that anything pops up on it, it's immediately taken down. You know, make the threat actor not be successful with their campaign. We have a .com of ours that they want $10,600 for it, and the threat actor, or actually whoever owns it, has owned it since 2008, and they've done nothing with it. They just want us to buy it, and a threat actor is not willing to pay that much, so it just sits there under monitoring, and we're not willing to pay that much. It is our full credit union name. So I did talk to an attorney, and they said, yes, you could probably yank that out from them, but it would cost you the same amount of money to do that in attorney fees. Also, once you do buy these domains, don't stop there. Put it in your DMARC protection that you should already have. Just because you own the domain doesn't mean someone can't use it as an email address. So you throw it into your DMARC and just say reject all.
I love that, DMARC. It seems like obvious, but you don't necessarily think of it. So I think that's really important. Thanks for that, Mark. And then just really quick on this topic, I want everybody on the line to know that if sort of these typo squat lookalike domains are something that you're dealing with, Allure Security offers a service called Unified Domain Blocking, which allows you to, block the registration of thousands of such domains having anything to do with your brand, and you're not having to purchase them, you're just blocking the registration of them. So there's a lot of cost savings there. And then there's also an aspect of it where if a domain that kind of fits the parameters of the service and looks like your brand, if that expires accidentally, so maybe that's a typo squatter like Mark said, if that person fails to renew, you're able to snatch that before it goes to market for the larger world. And then, or if you just make a mistake and one of your domains expires, it would capture that as well. So anyway, just there are some interesting solutions for that sort of thing. So I just wanted to say that, not to take anything away from what Mark has suggested. Brian, over to you. Immediate term, actionable tip. What can some of the people on the line kind of maybe even do? Maybe do it today is a little crazy, but like today or tomorrow, what kind of things can they get going?
Moving reporting front and center, make it easy. So, whether you're engaged in brand protection monitoring through a company like Allure, you're doing it yourself, whatever it may be, the people who are most likely to see the actual attack first are going to be not just your members, but the folks in your community. If we just look at, for example, area code based SMS text phishing, where they're just, spamming a phishing message out to a community because you're largest or you're the targeted credit union in that area, it's going to get into people's phones first. And people hear enough stories to know that they have good intentions and will report that, even if they're not necessarily a member of your credit union, but they have to know how to do so, right? So the easier you can make that type of reporting, the better, and that shouldn't be too difficult to deploy, whether that's through just, banner messages, duly making them aware of these types of attacks and how to let us know, or another mechanism, whatever you want to get creative with. But yeah, making sure that you can find out about them as quick as anybody else, I think is really important.
Love that. Gil, we got a couple of great tips so far. Hopefully you have something to add.
I do. So I like to go back to the basics, as Mark said, like the foundation stuff. And the one thing that I found with respect to not only brand protection, but just information security protection overall, is to keep a regular meeting cadence with all of your security and fraud vendors to discuss threat landscape, status of items, roadmap items, things of that nature. because these companies have insight into trends and threats, and that's their bread and butter, really. So they should be able to talk about that when you do meet with them. For example, with Allure, Megan, our rep, I learned about the new offerings. I learned about their offering you just talked about just now with the domain protection. I thought that was an awesome idea. And also, just look for vendors that roll efforts into reinvesting into new tech and ideas to apply that right technology that they're basically wielding to protect your information or your brand or your security, whatever that may be. Just something that indicates that they're going to be doing their job better over the long run.
Awesome. Open communication channels with your vendors, really great stuff. Open communication channels with the public and your members for reporting. And then, as Mark said, again, watching trademarks. I know that's something that our team talks to a lot of our customers about getting done if they haven't gotten it done already. So gentlemen, thank you so much for all of this. I am going to, we got one more question in here. It's a little bit off topic maybe, but I'm just going to throw it out there and you guys can kind of have at it. So the question is, and I'm sure it depends, of course, but how do you think about this, right? Maybe that's what I want to say. How frequently do you do things like penetration testing, fraud detection, prevention testing to make sure that your defenses are working as expected? Anybody can kind of hit that.
So I can go first if you'd like. So annually, we have an outside company do it because it's nothing better than having an independent party validate your security controls. And we will also have some things that we do internally on an ongoing basis. For example, the fish testing campaigns, things of that nature. We're also looking at adding some other tools to help us out with that, so that when it does come time for the annual audit, we're looking much better and we're in much better shape because we've been watching that throughout the year.
And we also do the annual audit with the penetration testing, internal, external, and we do the phishing, or same type of stuff. We've also engaged CISA that does external testing, penetration testing weekly, and we get a report weekly. We add that report to our board report. You never know when someone in IT is going to stand something up, and you don't know about it ahead of time. So it's always good to get everything scanned and get a good health check. And CISA's been doing a great job with it. Haven't had any issues. Anytime there's new IPs that we're aware of, we send them over to CISA, and they go ahead and add them to the scan.
And Mark, is that something that is free? Is that no cost?
Correct. That's no cost.
And so that's the cybersecurity. And go ahead. Sorry, Mark.
Your taxes pay for it, but
well, right,
no direct cost.
But what I mean is the people on the line can get in touch with Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is CISA.gov, and find out more information about that program.
Yep, they call it the Cyber Hygiene Scanning and Vulnerability Service.
Brian, anything else to add on that sort of frequency of testing? Or anything?
I don't know that I can provide data on aggregated credit union information, exactly how this question was asked, but I can tell you when we look at vulnerability scanning, which is part of what CISA is doing, which is part of the defensive effort naturally. I can tell you in our fall survey that we do every October that the reports there is continuous vulnerability scanning. About a little over a third of the respondent credit unions said they're always scanning for asset vulnerabilities. Next was weekly, about almost 25%, and then monthly came in. So monthly, weekly, and continuous represented over 80% of the respondents. So most people are at least doing vulnerability scanning on those types of assets, on all their assets, at least monthly, if not more frequently. So a little bit off of exactly how that question was answered, but maybe a little insight for you there.
Yeah, we do Rapid7 vulnerability scanning almost daily.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot about that part.
Sure.
Very good, very good. We have come to the end of our time. Gentlemen, I'm going to give you a second in case you have any last words, but just let me say thank you so much. This is just on a personal level, it's really fun for me to moderate these discussions. I love them. So you made my day because this is really fun for me. And then also, just dropping insights left and right. So I want to thank you on behalf of the audience. I want to remind the audience that we will get a link to the recording to you so that you can reference this and or share it with colleagues if you so choose. And I guess with that said, we only have a couple minutes here, but Mark, Gil, Brian, did you have anything that you wanted to close with don't feel pressure to, but I want to give you an opportunity.
Only thing I can close with, and I know it was mentioned throughout, but another cornerstone, and I should have mentioned it when you asked about actionable tips to take back to protect the brand, but information sharing organization, we found that extremely useful as well. We've gotten Cyber Angel notifications when things that we didn't realize were going on were going on. We've been reached out to and have been able to reach out as well with other institutions with respect to when something's going on with a fraud or an account that's suspicious or an ACH or whatever. So I just think that that's another important cornerstone.
Rising tide lifts all boats, sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. All righty. I think with that, we're going to shut it down. Thanks for that closing note there, Gil. Mark, thanks again. Brian, thanks again. Gil, thanks again. This was a thrill, and I think we really, again, shared some great tips with the audience. So with that, we're going to let everybody go. So we will see you next time. I'll say to the audience, keep your eyes peeled because we'll have another webinar next month. We do these monthly, but we'll send information about that via email so that you can register for those. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your week and weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.